Good morning, everybody, and a big welcome back to Lorraine. It's nice to have you back. I'm sure you had a wonderful time. Good. Okay, this week we're in Parshas Behar, page 696, 697. A very short parsha, and often read together with the next week's parsha, but Chosai, being a leap year and the way Yom Tov falls out, the two parshas are read separately. There's only 57 verses, and there's just really one small theme through the parsha, which is actually a massive theme because it's a foundation of a lot of things in Judaism. Okay, please excuse the noise, but I think we can live through it. Behar, on the mountain. And the parsha starts off, V'adaber Hashem Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor. Shem spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai, saying. Now, we are now well beyond the giving of the Torah, 696, well beyond Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. And suddenly the Torah says, oh, by the way, remember back, we're still sitting at the footsteps of Mount Sinai. The Jewish people are still there. But this week's parsha comes along and says, you remember we received the Torah many months ago? Well, this is what Hashem told me, says Moshe, to tell you on Mount Sinai. And there's a very important lesson in that. Let's go through some of what's in the parsha and we'll come back to it. Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, v'amata lahem, and say to them, we keep coming back, similar to the beginning of last week's parsha, all these, last week's parsha being emor, speak. We've already had vaydaber, lemor, daber, v'amarta. Just one after another, speak to Jewish people, continually speak to Jewish people, and say to them, what are you telling the Jewish people? Observe a Shabbos for the land. Make sure the land has a Shabbos, what we call Shemitah. Every seventh year, the land needs to lie fallow. Now, we know today farmers rotate their crops, and they'll leave one field this year and another field next year, and they'll leave fields to lie fallow. This halacha says every seventh year, farmers shut down. There is no farming in the land of Israel. It's just a complete, the word sabbatical comes from this. Complete sabbatical from everything. No farming happens whatsoever. Shemitah is one of those halachas that has been, now that Jewish people are back in Israel, is one of those halachas that initially when we went back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the rabbis needed to regenerate the land. The land was swamp, the land was desert, there was no farming in Israel. A few goats lying around and that was it. But essentially the prophecies tell us that Eretz Israel, if the Jewish people are not there, is not going to be a land that is productive. There's not going to be decent farming coming out of it. As soon as we go back in, everything flipped around. And Hashem tells us, no, the land needs to rest every seventh year. And you need to rest every seventh year. So initially, when we went back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the rabbis came up with a way of selling the land to a non-Jew and keeping on working it, that the land was now owned by a non-Jew for that year. Most of that has fallen away now. Every Shemitah year, more and more farmers are actually keeping Shemitah, and more farmers are experiencing the most incredible miracles out of Shemitah. Because imagine you're a farmer, you work really hard, you've got no idea if it's going to rain, you've got no idea if it's too hot, too cold, whatever the climatic conditions are, you have no idea when you put something in the ground, will it grow? How much return will I get? Will I actually survive this year? And we hear that all the time in Australia, how farmers are complaining that their yields are down, the yields up, whatever it is. But there are always problems with farmers in terms of the climate. And Hashem promises us, for 6 years you sow your field, and for 6 years you can prune your vineyard, you may gather in your crop, and the seventh year shall be a complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for Hashem. Your field shall not sow, your vineyard shall not prune. The aftergrowth of your harvest shall not reap, and grapes set aside yourself you may not pick. The rest of the land. Hashem promises us that in the 6th year you will get more, and in the 8th year you will be fine. You will be 100% okay. Just have emunah. And that's a lesson for everything. Everything comes from Hashem. And if we can inculcate that into ourselves, most of our worries go away. Now, obviously, we are human beings and we worry about things. But it's just throwing a little bit more emunah. Emunah is usually translated as faith. It's not a correct translation. It's faithfulness. It's the ability to believe that Hashem is going to give me everything that I need. Not everything I want, but everything that Hashem knows that I need. Not what I think I need, but what He thinks I need. He knows I need. And so Hashem promises us, and we see in Shemitah every year, every 7 years, these farmers where there were stories in the last Shemitah cycle where there were 3 or 4 farms that were not keeping Shemitah in Israel. And there was one farmer right in the middle of those other farms, and there was a fire. And there's photographs of the 3 farms around it completely burnt out. And that Shemitah farm in the middle, the fire did not touch that farm at all. Not because of the fire brigade, but because Hashem protected that field. We were in Bnei Netzarim, down south in December, January, and the farmers that we were working with kept Shemitah. The whole Moshav, as far as I know, kept Shemitah. And we were speaking to the farmer about it, and he said the most incredible things happened. Him and his business partner went and sat and learnt in Kollel for a year, which is what Shemitah is about. Go back. As a farmer, you don't have time to sit and learn properly. Go back and sit and learn. And they spent a year learning in Kollel. And they left their farm to lie fallow. And they came back the next year and they redid everything. All good. Everything worked out perfectly. It's one of those miracles that shows us who's in control. That Hashem's in control.
Can I just ask you something?
Yeah.
But what about the produce that they've got?
If there's produce that's growing automatically, it's what's called hefka, it's ownerless, and anybody can essentially come in and take it. So the gates are open, basically. You can't sell your produce. There's lots of halacha surrounding it. It's well beyond the scope of this now. That's for the farmers themselves. But for example, an esrog farmer. If you go into an esrog tree, you got an esrog orchard, and you start pulling esrogim off the trees, you're going to ruin those trees and the esrogim themselves. So what they do is that there's ways that the rabbis have put in place that they can sell the esrogim, give them away, however they work it, but that they will basically go in, the farmer will cut the esrog. A person will come in perhaps and choose an esrog off the tree, farmer will go in and cut them and charge them for his time. He's not charging them for the esrog. And so you can't, in Shemitah, we always joke about our little green bins that we've got now in Glen Ira to throw away all of our food waste. So in Shemitah, people have a bin whereby Shemitah, you're not allowed to waste Shemitah produce. So something comes from Shemitah, you throw it into this green bin and it becomes compost, so it's reused. It doesn't get thrown away. None of that produce is allowed to be thrown away. And so the flip side of it is every now and again we'll get Jaffa oranges in Australia, or we'll get something. In years after Shemitah, sometimes it'll arrive on our shores. It's less here, I think, than in America, because our produce here is pretty good in Australia. But it's a problem for us to eat Shemitah produce here. We have the issue with an esrog that comes here the year of Shemitah, the year after Shemitah usually for us. What do we do with that? Because you can't use that esrog. You can't make esrog jam out of it, because the fruit that's come out of Shemitah has got holiness to it. It's got sanctity. And we need to treat it with a certain level of respect, and not just, cut it up and throw it away. We're not allowed to do that with Shemitah produce. So there's Shemitah years, a few years away still. We had one a couple of years ago. It's a huge, big deal in Israel. It is a massive change around for everybody, because it doesn't only affect the farmer, it affects the entire economy, all the people in the country. And Israel gets through it every 7 years. They just get through it straight. It's quite simple.
Was shoved right on the Gaza border, and Shemitah year they sent the balloons over which exploded and burnt their crops. Came on Shemitah year, and and the most secular Moshav you could find, and yet they said Shemitah years, none of their crops got ruined. They actually helped them.
Yeah, there were lots of miracles that last Shemitah around there.
I've actually got photos of it.
Okay, the next section in the Parsha is Yovel, Jubilee. We all know what a Jubilee is. Well, we have a thing called Yovel in the Torah. It says, we're on verse 8, V'safarta lecha sheva shabasos shanim, sheva shanim, sheva pa'amim v'ayu lecha, yemei sheva shabasos hashanim, teisha v'arba'im shana. Count for yourselves 7 Shemitah cycles, 7 years, 7 times, a lot of sevens in this verse, the years of the 7 cycles of sabbatical years shall be for you 49 years. In other words, count 7 Shemitah cycles. Every 7 years you have Shemitah. After 7 Shemitah cycles, what do? Va'avarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi be'esel ha'chodesh. Sound a shofar blast, a trua, which is, we sound a trua on Rosh Hashanah, which is the shorter blast, not the very short one. In the 7th month, the broken blast of shofar in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, in other words, on B'yom, over the page, HaKippurim, on Yom Kippur, sound the shofar on Yom Kippur, and you shall sound it through your whole land. V'kidashtem es shnas chamishim shana v'karas v'ukrastem deror ba'aretz l'chol yoshavea yovel hi. It's a yovel. It's a year of Jubilee. Okay, sanctify that 50th year. So now we've just had Shemitah. The 7th Shemitah cycle, the 49th year is just finished. Comes Yom Kippur, blow a shofar throughout the land, and now we're going to have another year called Yovel, the 50th year. What happens in that year? Freedom throughout the land. Proclaim freedom is the way they translate it here. For all his inhabitants, it's Yovel. What do? All ancestral property goes back to the families that owned it. Each tribe had their designated part of the land. They might have bought and sold houses, fields through the 50 years. Now it's a time where we go to redress. We go back to basics. So last week's Parsha ended with the person who cursed Hashem. We spoke about the Mikhail, the guy who cursed Hashem because his mother was from the tribe of Dan, his father was an Egyptian, and he wanted to live with Dan, and they said to him, no, you got nothing to do with us. That we follow patrilineal lineage. Now it comes along and says, okay, now we're going back to exactly when we came into Israel, the land was distributed by Joshua. Joshua distributed. The Torah tells us towards the end of the Torah exactly where all the tribes were and what was going to happen. But Joshua, after they conquered the land, distributed the land to the 12 tribes. And now everything goes back. It's Yovel. In the 50th year, again, don't sow, no harvesting, etc. So we now have 2 years in a row every 50 years, but everything goes back. Then it tells us, don't aggrieve other people. Work out, if you're going to sell property, because it's going back in Yovel, don't oversell. Make sure that you compensate the person. If you're selling it and you know there's 5 years till Yovel, you can't sell a property for full price. You can only sell it for 5/50ths of its price, or however it works. But make sure that we don't rip people off, for want of a better term. According to the verse 16, according to the greater number of years shall you increase its price. According to the lesser number of years, you decrease its price. You're selling a number of crops. The land you're selling is the value of the number of crops that will happen left in the Yovel period. Hashem is making sure that the economy works. And he's showing us, by having Shemitah and by having Yovel, that he's in control. Because however much we think we're in control, take a step back and remember Hashem's there. Daven to Hashem, because he's going to give us everything we need. The next verse, the bottom verse on page 698, 699, verse 18, is the secret to us living in Israel. Secret to anybody living in Israel. V'asisem es chukoisai v'es mishpatai tishmeru. perform Hashem's decrees, observe His ordinances, v'asisem oisam, and perform them, then hishavtem al haaretz levetach, you'll dwell securely in the land. If you keep the mitzvahs, we will dwell in the land securely. It's as simple as that. And every time we have not followed this rule, as we learned last week, the land will spit us out. Simple as that. Or as it says, the land will vomit you out. And the land will not work in any period when we are not there doing things properly. So wherever we've been kicked out of Israel, it's because of some issue with us not behaving properly. Keeping the rules. Look at the first temple, it says that the 3 cardinal sins is what caused us to be exiled and the temple to be destroyed. We look at the second temple and it speaks about how we didn't behave properly with each other. We spoke Lashon Hora about each other. We didn't show each other respect. We'll come back to that towards the end, Blineda. Okay. It carries on talking about the redemption of land. The lands, everything's going to go back. It talks about what happens in a walled city, because a walled city is treated differently to a open fields and open cities. There's differences in terms of what happens in Shemitah with houses in walled cities and houses in open cities and fields, all brought through in this week's Parsha. The Torah then on 702 talks about the cities of the Levium, because in the distribution of the land, the tribe of Levi, which was the Levium and the Kohanim, were not given a portion of land like the other tribes. Each tribe had its own area. The Levium were given 48 cities across Israel, right across Israel, because the Levium and the Kohanim essentially were there to teach the Jewish people. Their job was to act as the teachers. And so the city of Levium across the land of Israel were there for 2 reasons. One is, and we'll get to this at some point later, but if a person killed somebody else inadvertently, not murder, but not an absolute accident, something in between, they were given free passage to go and live in a city of Levium. And so the Levite cities served a purpose for that. And as long as that person stayed in the city of Levium, he couldn't be touched. Obviously went through a court case and they had to check that everything fitted, but we've got a whole Masechta in the Talmud, the Maseches Makos, discusses that in a lot of detail. Exactly what happened with an unintentional murderer. But that's one of the reasons for the city of Levium. But the Levites were spread across the land to basically have a positive influence on the other Jewish people. Because these were the teachers, these were the people who were the Kohanim certainly serving in the temple, the Levium being there as the singers, as the people providing the atmosphere in the Beis HaMikdash, and they had certain gifts that were given to them. Kohanim and Levium were given certain gifts because they were not working the land. Their job was to educate the people. Okay, how do we prevent poverty? Quite simple. If somebody is destitute, somebody is down and out and they need your help, make sure that when you give them a loan, you don't give them interest. This is one source in the Torah, a few places, but here it's brought, when you lend to a fellow Jewish person, do not charge them interest. Lend them money as a way of helping them out, that they are going to get out of trouble. If they have to pay back with interest, it's not going to help them. And so, in fact, in our Daf Yomi cycle, where we learn a page of Gemara every day, we just finished last week the chapter on ribis, on interest. And all halachas in there. Very, very difficult chapter to learn, just in terms of the structure of it and the way it's, how hard. It's just one of the harder chapters in Shas. Okay. If a person is really down and out, a Jewish person owes another Jewish person a huge amount of money, he or she can sell themselves as a slave to another Jewish person. What happens with a Jewish slave?
They get treated better than...
Correct. If the master has got 2 pillows, one beautiful fluffy one and one little thin pillow, the slave gets the fluffy one. You know, if the master's eating steak, the slave eats steak. You cannot treat a Jewish slave in any way that's degrading or lower than you. Yes, he has to work for you, but he goes free, just like we learned before. The slaves are set free after 7 years. A Jewish slave only works for his master for 7 years. He's free.
Why do you become a Jewish slave?
Because a person's so impoverished they have to sell themselves just to get out of that
Is that the only
cycle.
reason why?
Generally, yeah. Yep. And the reason for that is, if you look at Pasuk Mem Beis on 704, 42, well, the verse before that says, he shall leave you, he and his children with him, he shall return to his family. In other words, he goes back to his ancestral heritage, he returns. Because in Yovel, he's gone. You cannot keep a slave for it. Yovel, he's gone. Generally only for 7 years, that's it. He can, a Jewish slave who chooses to stay with his master, can stay with his master, but he has to go to the door of the Beis Din and gets a hole pierced in his ear, or like a chunk of his ear cut out, to show that we are the servants of Hashem. And when Hashem took us out of Egypt, Hashem says, I took you out to be my servants. Now you want to carry on being the servant of somebody else. You're not listening. That's why we need to put a hole in your ear. You're not listening that I will look after you, says Hashem. And so he gets a hole bored in his ear, and he can stay with his master then beyond the 7 years, but at Yovel he goes free. He can't stay beyond that Yovel when Yovel year happens. Verse 42, as I said, for you, my servants whom I've taken out of the land of Egypt, they shall not be sold in the manner of a slave. You shall not subjugate him through hard labor. Why? Because you should fear Hashem. So we need to know that we are Hashem's servants. Hashem took us out of Egypt to be free to serve Hashem as his servants. Not absolute freedom that we can do what we like, but we are in a position whereby we are Hashem's servants, and not the servants of the rest of the world. Okay, and again, talks about if a person becomes impoverished, he's sold. The whole Parsha is around two things, I think. One is thinking about other people, and two is realizing that Hashem is in control. Short Parsha, but packs a punch. More often than not, as I said, this Parsha is read together with next week's Parsha, the Chuchosai, but it is one of those Parshas that's a foundation of who we are as Jewish people. We are the people who, when we go into a new country, which we've had to do over the centuries, we set up organizations to help others. We set up organizations that new people come in, we are the ones who will go and help the new people come in. We set up free loan societies. Everywhere you go, there's a gemach for this and a gemach for that, and you can find something. I mean, it's just incredible what we have done. And the foundation of that is what Hashem put in this week's Parsha. I want to go back right to the beginning, and let's discuss. I want to connect back to something I said in last week's Parsha, and then talk about this period of time that we're living in, which really this period of time as in the time between Pesach and Shavuos, the Sefiras Ha'omer, which was last week's Parsha. But I want to try and connect all of that. Okay, so you go back to the beginning of the Parsha, 696. And if you look, we spoke about the beginning of the Parsha is Shemitah. There's a phrase there which came up in last week's Parsha, which we discussed. I want to throw a different light on it based on a share that I heard from Rabbi Gladstein late last week. Okay, but if you look at verse 4, Daled, V'shana Hashvis, the 7th year, Shabbos Shabboson year. It shall be a Sabbath of Sabbaths, is how we can try. A complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for Hashem. Year la'aret, Shabbos la'Hashem, Sadcha kol Yisrael, v'chamacha lo tzizmor. Okay, so it's giving you the background. This year will be that your fields you not sow, your vineyard do not prune. It's a Shabbos Shabboson. Okay. If you just turn back to Parshas Emor, last week's Parsha, just a few pages back to 682. Chapter 23. Vadaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta alehem, moedei Hashem asher tikru asam mikrei kodesh, Elohem moedei. Sheishis yamim taseh malacha, v'yom hashvi shabbason mikra kodesh, kol malacha lo sasu shabbos hi Hashem b'chol moshvesechem. So Hashem spoke to Jewish people, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Hashem's festivals, these are the festivals, the holy days. You can't, they're the appointed festivals. 6 days labor may be done. But the seventh day is a Shabbos on the same two words. Okay? Mikra Kodesh, it's a holy day, you don't do any work. It's a Shabbos for Hashem in all your homes, in all your dwelling places. That same phrase, Shabbos. So last week I spoke about, that's the introduction to the Parsha about all the Yom Tovim, all the festivals. So I heard from Rabbi Gladstein last week, after our shir, but in the name of the Rebbe Reb Heschel of Krakow. He said, look at this verse. What has Shabbos got to do with Yom Tov? So we said last week, when we brought what Rashi said, that just like on Shabbos we can't do melacha, on Yom Tov we can't do melacha, except we're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. And that's really, and so therefore Shabbos is brought to the introduction. That's Rashi's pshat, as we call it, his simple explanation. The Rebbe Reb Heschel says, let's look at what that verse is saying. 6 days you're going to work, and the seventh day is Shabbos Shabboson. The seventh day is, the Yom Tov we call, the Torah calls Shabbos Shabboson, is Yom Kippur. It's a Shabbos of Shabbos. So the Rebbe Reb Heschel says, for 6 days is like Shabbos, but you can work because you can cook on those days. You can prepare food on those days. What are those days? First and seventh day Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, first day Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeres. 6 days you can prepare food, but you have to keep them like you keep Shabbos except for that. The seventh day is Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is like Shabbos. You can't do anything on Yom Kippur, exactly like you can't on Shabbos. That's how he explains why this is brought in here. So I just thought it was a lovely way of rounding off what we said last week and connecting it all up. We spoke about last week, and this is what I want to speak about now, the Omer, and the counting of the Omer, and the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, what that is all about. So we said last week that the Tzaddukim, the Sadducees, came along and they said, no, they only believed in the written Torah, not the oral Torah. And therefore they counted the Omer and kept Shavuos, because the Pasuk says, on the day after Shabbos. And so they started counting the Omer on the Sunday, whereas we understand Shabbos to mean first day Pesach. It's a rest day. So that fits in beautifully with the Rebbe Reb Heschel's understanding of what that introduction to all the Yom Tovim is. Each of these days is like Shabbos, and in fact, at the end of the section where we talk about Sukkot is also referred to as Shabbos. And so that throws their whole argument under the bus. It's gone. And so this period of the Omer is an incredible period. Historically for the Jewish people, it's an amazing, amazing period, both positive and negative, and I want to discuss what happens in the Omer. What is going on in our times in the Omer? We have so many different days that are contradictory, conflicting, and just give a little bit of background as to what this is all about. Okay, so the Ramban describes the 7 weeks of the Omer like a period of Chol HaMoed. So we have Pesach and Shavuos as a Yom Tov at the beginning, a Yom Tov day at the end, and days in between. Pesach we have 5 days in between. Sukkot we have 6 days in between, because we have Shmini Atzeres is the 8th day, and the last day of Pesach is 7th day, just ignoring for the moment our extra days of Yom Tov. But in Israel you've got the first day of Pesach, then you've got 5 days of Chol HaMoed, and then you've got the 7th day of Yom Tov. Sukkot you've got first day Sukkot, you've got 6 days, and then you've got the 8th day being Shmini Atzeres. Those days in between, the Ramban says that's similar to the period between Pesach and Shavuos. The 7 weeks represent those 7 days in a similar way. And so there are certain customs that some people have whereby they won't do work, certain types of work when it comes to time of counting the Omer. We count the Omer every night. And so when it's nightfall, until they count the Omer, there's some people who will not do any work and things like at that time. Chol HaMoed is a time where you're allowed to do some things, you're not allowed to do other things. You're allowed to drive and you're allowed to cook and everything else like that, but I don't work, for example, on Chol HaMoed if I can help it. There are many people who writing, if you have to write, you write, but you write in a different kind of way and you're handwriting differently. I don't know who writes these days anymore, but it's all writing with fingers on phones now. But there are differences. And this period of the Omer, the Ramban is not saying that the Omer is Chol HaMoed and you have to have those same halachas. What he's saying is it's an enlightened period of spirituality. It's an elevated period, because what happens is we get to Pesach and we have the Seder, and in that Seder we experience some form of our own freedom. Hashem takes us out of our own Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim comes from the word Metzer Yam, which is like a constriction, and Pesach is about to free us. But what happens is we get freed on Seder night, and then we get dropped back, and we have to work on it. We get shown where we can get to, and then we work. And through the 49 days of the Omer, through those 7 weeks, we work on ourselves to grow and to come closer to Hashem, and to get to a point where we can come to Shavuos and receive the Torah. Because every year on Shavuos, Hashem gives us the Torah again. It's called Zman Matan Torah Sena, the time of the giving of the Torah. Hashem gives us the Torah, so to speak, our Torah for each of us individually on Shavuos. And so it's a period of going from this very high level on first night Pesach, dropping back down and then growing back up to the level again, where we are fitting and ready and able to accept the Torah. So there's many things that people do in the Omer. There's lots of books that are written on how a person can grow and what a person can do to achieve that elevated status that we can stand before Hashem on Shavuot and say, I'm ready to receive the Torah.
Where does Lag BaOmer?
We'll get there. No, we'll get there. We're going to get there. Okay, so 49 days. Now, in our times, this period of 49 days is filled with sad days and special happy days and different days. And so I want to just give a little bit of background as to what the period is about. Essentially, based on the Torah, it's a period of joy, because it's a time of growth. It's a time whereby we are growing, connecting to Hashem and getting closer and closer to Hashem as we go through the 49 days. If we go back to the times of the Mishnah. Now, the times of the Mishnah was written nearly 1800 years ago. The rabbis who are quoted in the Mishnah, who are all those rabbis of the time from about 2100 years ago to about 1800 years ago, are known as Tanoim. And the Tanoim were the rabbis of the Mishnah period until we get to the rabbi who we call Rebbe. Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi was the rabbi who brought down the Mishnah. The Mishnah being the summary of the oral Torah that was handed down from Mount Sinai. This week's Parshas Behar, on Mount Sinai, we received the written Torah and the oral Torah. The oral Torah was the way we understand the written Torah, the way we explain it. We can't look at the Torah, as we've said many times, and look at a verse and say, yep, I fully understand what a mezuzah is and why I have to have it on the wall. Because the Torah just says, write them and place them on your doorposts. What are them? So the Karaites who we spoke about, their custom is generally they don't have a mezuzah because they don't know what it is. It's something we contemplate. More in recent times, some of them in Israel have put up mezuzahs because it looks odd. There are about 30,000 Karaites in the world. It's not a big number. but mostly live in Ashdod. And some of them do now put up a mezuzah because otherwise they'd look really odd. But some of them put up nothing, and some of them put up the Sefiras Ha'omer, the 10 Commandments, on their door. Because what are them? The Torah doesn't tell us. And so, but we know from the oral law that we have to put up the verses of Shema and V'ahavta in a mezuzah, and the halachas about it, that has to be written in ink, on parchment, and how it's written, and all the halachas are from the oral law. And so that oral law was handed down. When we get to the point of the times of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his students and his based in at the time, the Sanhedrin decided the Romans have destroyed the temple. It's getting to a point where we're going to lose this oral tradition, this understanding of how the halachas all work. And so they wrote down the Mishnah in 6 volumes. It's very short, but you need to understand, in order to understand Mishnah, you need to discuss it, and the oral teachings that happen and things that happen in the yeshiva, the discussions that happen in the yeshiva is the continuation of the oral law, and the Mishnah is really there just to provide a guide, so something to grab onto. Oh yeah, this is how do we explain that verse in the Mishnah? Oh, we go back to this verse in the Torah. And so Rebbe took a whole lot of statements of the rabbis of the time and put them into the Mishnah. There were many, many other statements which were left out. We call them brises. And the Gemara will bring brises, which are statements by those same rabbis, to explain why the Mishnah used that halacha. And it'll then say, yeah, it's based on this law from that verse in the Torah. Or it's based on something we call halacha l'Moshe Sinai, something that Moshe brought down from Sinai orally. And that's how Mishnah fits in with Gemara. But at the time, under Roman persecution, we're being attacked. And there is a young, not so young, but a farmer, a shepherd called Akiva. And Akiva is an ignoramus, but he's a very nice guy. And he's employed by somebody called Kalba Savua. Kalba Savua was one of the richest men in Israel. Kalba Savua literally means like an overstuffed dog. But no, it's positive. He was one of the richest and most generous people in Israel. And so if somebody needed a meal, he would feed them until they couldn't eat. He would offer them as much food as they could possibly eat. And that's where the nickname came from. It was a positive name, not a negative. Okay. But when you say it like overstuffed dog, it doesn't sound very good. But Kalba Savua was a very generous man. He had a daughter called Rachel, who saw this shepherd, Akiva, and fell in love with him. Now, Akiva was an ignoramus. It's brought down by Chazal, by the rabbis, that in fact he was anti the rabbis in many ways. Lots of different stories about that. But she wanted to marry him. And Kalba Savua said, you marry him, you're written out. You've got nothing. I'm not going to support you at all. And she says, fine, I want to marry him. And she marries him. And she encourages him to go and learn. And off he goes and sits in the prep class with the kids. It's brought down that he sat with his own kid and learned the Aleph base, letter by letter. And obviously he's an older person. He was clearly quite intelligent. And he went through school very quickly, yeshiva very quickly, and spent 12 years studying. He comes home after 12 years. And he overhears his wife Rachel, who is poverty-stricken, remembering her father was the richest man, saying to her neighbor's telling her off, like, where's your husband? You haven't seen him for 12 years. And she says, if he went and studied for another 12 years, he'd have my blessing. And Rabbi Akiva doesn't even go in the door, and he goes and studies for another 12 years. He comes back. Now, it's not brought whether he came home in between those 24 years at all, in the first 12 years or in the second 12 years. They had children, so we have to, at some point, assume he was 40 when he went to learn. And so it's a hard one to understand exactly, did he come home or not, but he was essentially in yeshiva for 24 years. After 24 years, he comes back. And she comes running out to see him, and she falls at his knees, and he's got 24,000 students. He is Rebbe Akiva, one of the greatest rabbis that's ever lived. And his students come and try and get her off him, because you can't just come and grab onto the rabbi, it's not right. And so he says, hold on a second. All of my Torah and all of your Torah, 24,000 students, is because of her. It's entirely on her. She gets 100% reward. Kalba Savur, in the meanwhile, hears that this Rebbe Akiva's come to town, and he goes to see this Rebbe Akiva because he realizes, he knows his daughter is really struggling. He knows his son-in-law went off to learn. He comes to this great rabbi and he says, look, I took a vow some years ago that I'm going to wipe my daughter out. And I don't think it was the right thing to do. So Rebbe Akiva said to him, had you known that your son-in-law would go into Cheder and learn the Aleph base, would have you even taken the vow? And he said, no. He said, and he let him off the vow. There's a way of letting a person off the vow. You find an opening, and it needs to be done with a beis din, with rabbis. It's not something that somebody takes on an oath or a vow, a neder. There's a way of getting out of it in many cases, not in every case, but generally we can get out of it. One of the things we do, for example, when we donate money, we usually say bli neder without taking a neder, so that we don't force ourselves to do it. Now, people mistakenly believe sometimes that you stand at the bim and you get an aliyah, and you say, I'm going to donate X dollars, and bli neder, that means I'm not going to give it. No, it doesn't mean that. You're absolutely obligated to give it, but you're not giving it with a vow. It's a little bit of a trick of sorts, but we often say that we don't take on something as a neder. And if we do something a number of times, it can have the force of taking it on as a neder. I'll give you a simple example. My father's yahrzeit in 2 weeks' time. So there is an old minhag, most people today don't do it, but I took it on bli neder that I would fast on the day of the yahrzeit. The reason why we have to take it on bli neder, because if the yahrzeit happens to fall out on a Shabbos, you're not allowed to fast on Shabbos. And so you get out of it that way. Or if I wanted to make a siyum on the day of the yahrzeit, then I can make a siyum and eat. But if I'd taken on a fast, I'm going to fast, as a neder, then I can't get out of it, or it's very difficult to get out of it. There are ways of getting out of things, but yeah. So everything in life works around that. We have loose lips, most of us, and we say things without realizing it. And often we'll say things and it becomes forceful, like a neder. But we need to be very careful. But Rebbe Akiva has these 24,000 students.
They all came to the farm.
They all came to town, yes. Wherever, many of them were there. What I don't understand is, let's look at this. The biggest yeshiva today in the world is probably the Mir Yeshiva. The Mir Yeshiva has got about 8,000 students, as far as I know, in Yerushalayim. It's in more than 20 different buildings. Around part of Yerushalayim, there's I think last time I remember, there were 22 buildings. And you go in some of the buildings, and there's 7 or 8 stories of learning, like set up. The way Ashkenaz yeshiva works is it's set up like a shul. Each of them is like a big shul in itself. And basically people sit with stenders and learn. And there's hundreds of people in every single one of these buildings. And there's shiurim. I went to a shiur in the kitchen. It had to be done with microphones and speaker systems because there were so many people there. And it wasn't a regular, it was a Friday where they're generally not learning in the same way. So just a Friday lunchtime shiur for the boys that were there. And there were still several hundred people in the shiur. It's just incredible size. And now we've got Rebbe Akiva, who's got a yeshiva that's 3 times the size of it. Now they lived all over, whatever. They weren't all learning with him at that time. But unfortunately, the Gemara brings down that all 24,000 died in a plague. The reason brought by the Gemara is they didn't show respect to each other. They didn't show kavod one to the other. And all 24,000 of them died in a plague. During the period between Pesach and Shavuos, during the Omer. It says Rebbe Akiva then, it's brought down in the Mishnah, Rebbe Akiva then went out and got 5 new students, and he taught them. Otherwise, Torah would have been forgotten. That's how these were the 24,000 leading rabbis. It's actually brought down in the Gemara. It says that the 12,000 pairs of students didn't show each other respect and died. They died from something called askara, which was a plague. It's some disease that constricts the throat, whatever it might be. There are people who said in COVID early on, maybe COVID's something like askara, whatever that is, we don't know. But you suddenly had this loss of Torah learning. The 24,000 greatest rabbis at the time are just gone. And remember, there's Roman persecution going on. There's a huge thing going on. Those 24,000 students died in 33 days in the period of the Omer. How we understand those 33 days is different across different customs. So there are people, and we have that as a period of mourning for 33 days in the period of the Omer. So there are some people who keep the mourning period from second day Pesach until 33 days later, like Ba'omer, the 33rd day. There's some people who keep it from Rosh Chodesh until 3 days before Shavuot. Some people keep it slightly differently. There's 3 or 4 different customs as to how we keep mourning. Ashkenazim generally, if we keep the first period, we'll keep it from Pesach until Lag BaOmer. This year, Lag BaOmer falls out on a Sunday, the next coming Sunday, and so people will generally have a haircut and shave on Friday, respect to Shabbos. These are customs that are brought down. They don't have the force of Torah law. They are customs. It's different to the mourning of the 3 weeks and the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av is something that happened in the Torah. The destruction of the temples was foreseen as happening on Tisha B'Av because of what happened with the spies, which we'll learn about in a few weeks' time. And so through this period, we have 33 days of semi-mourning, let's call it that. We don't listen to music, we don't have haircuts, we don't party, basically, in this period. Out of remembrance of what happened, that the students of Rabbi Akiva didn't show each other respect. Now, I don't believe, and the rabbis bring this down, that it's not that the students of Rabbi Akiva beat each other up. They just didn't hold each other on as high a level as they should. At their level, obviously, these were the greatest rabbis. And we're not talking about mere mortals. We're talking about great people. And Hashem judges people on their level. So somebody who's a great rabbi is going to be judged at a totally different level to us regular people. We each judge for ourselves. Where should I have been in my life? What should have I achieved in my life? I should not have achieved the same thing as some great rabbi who was born into a rabbinic family of 25 generations. That person's going to obviously be streets ahead of me. And so each of us is at our level. What can I achieve for myself? So one of those students of Rabbi Akiva was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we've got time for another story, I'll tell you a story about him. He had a dispute with one of his students. He was one of the 5 students of Rabbi Akiva that he took on, and they became the 5 of the great rabbis of the time that basically Torah came through them. One of the other rabbis had a discussion. There were 3 of them sitting around. They had a discussion. Why did the Romans build roads and bathhouses? And one of the rabbis said, oh, it's because they wanted to do it for the Jews. And Rabbi Shimon said, no, it's not. They did it all for themselves. Anyway, one of the other people sitting there ran off and, to use the Australian term, dobbed him in to the Romans. And now the Romans are like, okay, we're out to get this Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai goes with his son Elazar, and they run and they hide. They hide in a base medrash, and his wife comes and brings them food every day, and they in the shul basically learning, sleeping, living, and they're able to hide there for a while until the Romans get close and they have to run away, and they run to a cave. And they go into the cave, and a carob tree grows in the front of the cave, and there's a river that flows through, and they eat carobs and drink water. They've only got the clothes on their back, and so every day they dig holes in the sand, they take off their clothes, and they basically just sit in sand the whole day, except when they get up to daven. They put their clothes on, they take them off, they eat carobs and they drink water. And they sit and learn for 12 years, the two of them. The depth, the deepest Torah. They connect to Hashem at a level unknown before. They come out after 12 years because they're told that the Roman emperor has now passed away. They can come out, they're free. Because the rule in Rome was if the emperor's got a death penalty on somebody, once he's no longer there, you're free. They come out and they see people working as farmers. And Rabbi Shimon cannot understand. He's at such a high level. He's almost in Shemayim. He's almost in heaven. He's so close to Hashem. And he looks at this person and a fire comes down and this person's incinerated. And a voice comes and says, Shimon and Elazar, get back in the cave and just bring yourselves down to a level of human beings. They go back in the cave for another year. They didn't have the other 12 years, but they come out, and it's brought down that on the day he died, he taught what we know today as the Zohar. The Zohar being the light of Torah. The Kabbalistic side of Torah was brought down that day. It was explained to students. And the Zohar as a work was only found many centuries later and publicized. Again, it was only taught from teacher to student and only at very high levels of student and only when a person reached the age of 40. All this Kabbalistic teaching was very depth of Torah. A lot of what we learn today, thanks to the way the generations have worked, the Arizal publicized in the big way, the rabbis of Sfat in the 1500s publicized more and learnt much more Kabbalah. And today, a lot of the Torah we're learning is actually Kabbalistic Torah. But it wasn't publicized. There's a whole discussion amongst various... The academics tend to say, well, the Zohar wasn't written by Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, it was written by the person who found it, and he's just purporting it to be this deep work. The rabbis say, no, we've got a tradition that this is what Rabbi Shimon taught his son and his students the day he died. The day he died was Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. And so that's why Lag BaOmer is that one day where we celebrate his death. We're celebrating the fact that he taught, illuminated the world with the depth of Torah. And so Lag BaOmer has become this day whereby bonfires. So bonfires, because there was a fire that enveloped them. We read about this quite often with various different rabbis. They have like a fire around them when they're learning. In English, we'd probably call it an aura. And somebody who can see the aura of the fire of another person is on the level that they can see it. So that's really what it's about. It's a very, very deep level. So we have this mourning period where we don't do certain things. Everybody holds the mourning period from Rosh Chodesh until Lag BaOmer. So Rosh Chodesh 2.5 weeks ago, or nearly 3 weeks ago, till Lag BaOmer next week. That period of time, all of Jewry is holding mourning. The beginning part, Samar, and the end part, Samar, but this middle period, everybody is. Now, in our modern times, various things have crept into the calendar. And they all happen to be at this time, and that's why there's such... One of the reasons why there's such a dispute as to whether we should be celebrating these various different days, commemorations, celebrations, all at this time, across the period of Omer. So I want to just run through some of them and give a little bit of background on some of the days we have in this period. Okay, so we've discussed Lag BaOmer, and we've discussed why there is mourning in this period. I've closed my Chumash and I'm about to open it again, but don't worry. So we have a day coming up. So Lag BaOmer, as I said, is Sunday. We have a day coming up this week on Wednesday. I'll read what happened in the Torah and we'll come back to 7, 8. Not a fast day, no. Okay, so in Parshas Behar, chapter 9, which is on 7, 8, if you want to go there, you don't have to go there. I'll just read the English. Shem spoke to Moshe in the wilderness in Sinai, in the second year from the exodus from the land of Egypt, in the first month, saying. So 2 years out of Egypt, in the month of Nisan, Hashem says, the children of Israel shall bring the Pesach offering at its appointed time. Bring the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan, second year out of Egypt. The first year out of Egypt, they didn't, they were at Har Sinai. This is the second year out. On the 14th in the afternoon, make it as appointed time, according to decrees, law shall make it. Moshe spoke to the children of Israel to make the Pesach offering. They made the Pesach offering the first month, on the 14th of the month in the afternoon. In the wilderness Sinai, according to everything Hashem commanded Moshe, children of Israel did. Right, verse 6. There were men who had been contaminated by human corpse and who could not make the Pesach offering on that day. So they approached Moshe and Aaron on that day. And those men said to him, we are contaminated through human corpse. A person who has come in contact with a human corpse is not allowed to bring the Korban Pesach. They have to go through the paraduma, the spiritual cleansing with the ashes of the red heifer, sprinkled on them on the 3rd and the 7th day, and then on the 8th day they can bring any offering that come into the temple. This is one of the reasons why, or the reason why, a Kohen is not allowed to be in contact with the dead person, because we're not ritually pure to be able to go into the temple. So these people, who these people were, there's a whole discussion exactly who they were. It's brought down, they could have been the people who were carrying Joseph's bones, or the other tribal leaders, the 12 tribes' bones were brought out of Egypt. Those people carried them. It could have been the people who, Nadav and Avihu, who died. It could have been them who took them out. The question with that is why? Because it's already 2 weeks after that incident, because that incident happened on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. This is 2 weeks later. Potentially it's the person we learned about last week, the Makalo, the person who cursed Hashem, or the few other options who it actually was. But these people were what we call Tamames. They were contaminated by a human corpse, and therefore they were not allowed to bring the Korban Pesach. Not necessarily through fault of their own. So they said, why should we be diminished by offering Hashem's offering at an appointed time amongst the children of Israel? It's not our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. We were doing the right thing. You asked us to carry Joseph's bones. They're sitting with us. We're contaminated by those bones. It's not like we did something wrong that we contaminated. We want to bring it Pesach Sheni. So Moshe said to them, wait back, I'll go and find out. This is one of the times when Moshe said, I need to go and ask Hashem. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any man comes contaminated through human corpse on a distant road, whether you or generations make a Pesach offering to Hashem in the second month, Pesach Sheni. On the 14th of the second month, Iyar, this month, bring a Pesach Sheni. And it goes through, you eat it with matzahs and bitter herbs. Don't leave over anything in the morning. Don't break a bone. Exact same laws as bringing the Korban Pesach. Bring a lamb, bring a goat, baby lamb or baby goat. Slaughter it. Don't break bones. Eat it with matzah and maror. Everything we do for the Korban Pesach on Pesach, those people who couldn't bring a Korban Pesach because they were contaminated or they were too far away from Yerushalayim, they couldn't get to Yerushalayim, you get a second opportunity. It's the only time in the Torah that this type of thing happens. And so we obviously don't have Pesach Rishon. We didn't this year have Pesach. We couldn't bring a Korban Pesach. We have Pesach Sheni. So Pesach Sheni in our times is one of those elevated days. We don't say Tachanun on that day. We don't say Tachanun. One of the prayers we say in the whole of the month of Nisan. Interestingly enough, on Shabbos we say a prayer of Harachamim. Av Harachamim was brought down. We say it after the Torah and after Haftorah. Before we say Ashrei, we say Av Harachamim, and it's a memorial prayer for those Jews who died during the Crusades. And we don't say it generally on days when we don't say Tachanun, or on days like on Rosh Chodesh Benchim, when we're going to bless the new moon that will be in the next week, we won't say Av Harachamim. But during the period of the Omer, in Nisan we don't say Tachanun at all, we still say Av Harachamim. And certainly, even if it's Rosh Chodesh, we would still say it, it's very much a custom because it's only 1,000 years old. But there are many shuls that will say it, most shuls will say it throughout this period, even if we wouldn't have said Tachanun on that day. Because it was introduced for people who died, most of whom the Crusades died in this period of time as well. So this period of time is an elevated time, but it's also a time when there's many, many tragedies have happened. So that's Pesach Sheni. How do we celebrate Pesach Sheni today? We don't say Tachanun. And we eat matzah. So we have a meal with matzah. You can finish your box. So what I'm going to try and do is make soft matzah tomorrow night. Or maybe on Wednesday morning, but I want to try and make soft matzah, see if I can. It's not going to... Now, the other thing with... I'll still have a piece of regular matzah because the other thing with Pesach Sheni is you don't have to clean out your house and you're allowed chometz in your house.
Not again.
Yes, it's not for one day that we have to do it again. But yeah, that's Pesach Sheni. So, like Pesach Sheni is on Wednesday, Lag BaOmer on Sunday. All right. Now, in our times, modern times, we've got a whole lot of other days in this period of time which kind of in some ways contradict other halachas brought in place. And that's why there's a lot of controversy, not the only reason, but there's a lot of controversy amongst at least 4 other days in this period. So we discussed Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim being on the 20th and 42nd day of the Omer a few weeks ago. The Vilna Gaon brought down that those are 2 very, very special days. And Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim will be in a few weeks' time. The other 2 days that happen in this time are Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron. Now, Yom HaShoah is an interesting one. I did a little bit of research into the history of it. It was introduced, it was put into Israeli law only in 1959. But the first year it was put in place was in 1948. The Israeli rabbis said, let's have a day to commemorate the Shoah. And they put it in place on the 27th of Nisan in 1948. So it would have been a few weeks ago. Oh, sorry. Today it's on 27th of Nisan. Initially it was on the 10th of Teves. 10th of Teves is a regular fast day, Asara B'Teves. And so they coupled it with a regular fast day. All our other commemorations for destruction of the temple, Jewish people, expulsion from Spain, various other things, generally we've got Tisha B'Av as the day where we commemorate destruction of the Jewish people over time, communities and things. And so there was a lot of controversy with Yom HaShoah. So the rabbis chose initially 10th of Teves. It became a big political to and froing from 48 until 59 eventually, when they chose the 27th of Nisan, being the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And so that was not necessarily a good day because it was the end of the Warsaw Ghetto, thousands of people were killed. And so it became a very controversial day from a rabbinic perspective. Why do we not use a day that we've already got? Because the Holocaust happened over a period of 6 years. It wasn't a one-day event. And so we need to commemorate it. And so it's become this day, well, yes, it's an extra day, but did we need this extra day? And that becomes a whole discussion in modern day things. And then why the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? For another time. We don't have time for that right now. But that is one of those days that's commemorated in Israel. How is it done? They have a siren, 2 minutes of silence, and then there's ceremonies where people light 6 candles representing the 6 million. That's generally how it's commemorated. The days that we have halachically, Tisha B'Av and the fast day and the 10th of Teves, are fast days. And a fast day is there to connect to Hashem and to work out what we have to do to not have other tragedies in the Jewish people. That's really why we have fast days. How can we connect to Hashem? Okay. Yom HaZikaron, the day before Yom HaAtzmaut, again, that's just commemorating, and that's, in some ways, I guess this year obviously was significantly highlighted beyond anything that we've had in our times. Still what's going on. But again, it's just a day to pay tribute to those people who've given up their lives for the Jewish people, that we can have a Jewish country. Which brings me to Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Day of Independence. Another day filled with controversy. Because it's in the middle of the Omer, it's in the period of time where everybody who's keeping the mourning period of Rabbi Akiva's students is mourning. And yet there's this festive day in Israel. And so we've got complete extremes as to how we look at Yom HaAtzmaut. And it's really around what is the state of Israel. And how do we regard the state of Israel from a halachic perspective? So let's start from the extreme that we've got right now on that side. That's my right. but I'm not necessarily right wing. But it's not because if you look at groups like Naturikata, they've got a basis in. Let's not talk about Naturikata of today. Let's talk about Naturikata of 70, 80 years ago. Naturikata means the guardians of the wall, the protectors of the wall. The Gemara says that we are not allowed to establish a Jewish state in Israel until time Mashiach. In other words, Mashiach will herald in the Jewish state. Comes Zionism in the 1800s, and it was pure secular Zionism originally. We need a Jewish state because we've got anti-Semitism, essentially. We need somewhere where Jews can feel safe. I think that this argument has been laid to waste. I think, Israel is now the new anti-Semitism. We can all see that in our times. There's no question about that. But so you had these people who said, no, we can't have a Jewish state. And most religious groups were in that camp pre-48. There's no question about it. There were some, Rav Kook being one of them, the Mizrahi type organization being others, who became, let's use the term religious Zionists. I don't like these baskets that people put themselves in, but let's use that term. I mean, Rav Kook was as Haredi as they come. But he felt that establishing a state, he died before 48, but he felt establishing a Jewish state was the way to bring Moshiach. The Jewish state that was established is not a halachic Jewish state. It's essentially a Western country run by Jews. What has happened over the period of time from the establishment of the state until today is those that are anti have become completely, violently anti, like the Turikata. In fact, they've flipped sides. It's just, I don't even want to discuss this. But where they are holding now, I've seen them described as anti-Jews dressed as Haredim. They're not even described as Jews by many people. It's scary. You have groups like Satmar, like Brisk, who say, no, we can't have a Jewish state right now, but they're not anti-having Jews living in Israel. Some are, some aren't, but again, that's kind of the next stage. In with all of that was Lubavitch. Chabad in the 1920s, 1930s were very much in that Naturikata camp, not this modern day group, but that camp of we can't have a Jewish state. At some point that flipped and the Lubavitcher Rebbe changed things, that Chabad is more in the next camp, I guess. This is something I'm basing on what I heard from Rabbi Breitowitz, and it took me back to a shir that I heard when I was in yeshiva a few years ago from the Rosh Yeshiva. And I went back to look for it. And essentially, most use the term Haredi Jews today. I don't like breaking people into groups. Most Haredi Jews feel that it's a blessing from Hashem that we have a Jewish government. It would be far better if we had a Jewish government that ran by Jewish law. But at least it's not the British mandate. At least it's not the United Nations. At least it is Jewish people governing Jews. And we need to work from the inside to bring in Jewish law. And essentially that's what most of the ultra-Orthodox parties are trying to do. They're working from the inside. They don't accept or don't sit comfortably that it's a Jewish state run as a non-Jewish state, essentially. But they accept the fact that it is, and are thankful that Hashem has given us the chance to at least establish something in Israel. And the miracles of Israel are just quite clear to see from that. The next group along we'd probably call Dati Leumi, modern Orthodox, a terrible term, because modern Orthodox, particularly in America today, is probably modern reform almost. That's moving very, very far left, again, not politically necessarily, but probably is. But it's become well beyond it. Whereas in Israel, what we would call modern Orthodox is far more religious than what we see in America. But that Dati Leumi group basically says, yes, 1948 was that very special day, the 20th day of the Omer, Yom HaAtzmaut. It's a very special day because Hashem has given us the ability to bring Mashiach. It's the birth pains, it's the beginning of Mashiach. And so that group would then celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut properly. And then obviously you've got secularists who are kind of, again, in both sides, anti and pro. I think the very strong secular Zionist movement is not what it was in the late 1800s, early 20th century at all. It's completely different. What we have seen in the last 6 months, 8 months now, is a coming together of Jewish people. And what we saw with Rabbi Akiva's student was this pulling apart. The second temple was destroyed because of what we call sinas chinam, baseless hatred. One Jew just dislikes another Jew for no reason whatsoever. I saw it described straight after October 7th as it flipped from sinas chinam to avas chinam, baseless love. Love for a fellow Jew because that other person is Jewish. No other reason whatsoever. And that we've seen, thank God, in what's happened since October 7th. There are fractures. I saw this morning the president of Iran was possibly killed in a helicopter crash. Some person from Tel Aviv University came out and said, pity it wasn't Bibi. I think that is disgraceful. And so we still have these fissures and we still have these people ripping us apart. What we need to do is get together. And then we can celebrate all of these days, because the period of mourning in the Omer will be not a period of mourning anymore. It will be a period of joy and celebration, because at the end of the day, it says that Nisan is the time for the Geula. We're now beyond Nisan, but any day the Geula can come, the redemption can come, Mashiach can come anytime. There are times which are better than others, but the 42nd day, according to the Gra, is a very special day. And maybe that's when Mashiach will come.
Can I tell you something? Can I interrupt you?
Let me finish and we'll switch off the recording. How's that?
Just remind me about
Okay.
the Churei.
Okay. So we just daven for the coming Mashiach. He should come speedily in our time.